On the 22nd of June, 1972, a scientist stood over a dead city. There were 122 residents left. Every one of them would be dead soon, and none of them would leave children behind. 4 years earlier, that same space had held 2,200. It had food, it had water, it had heat, clean bedding, and 256 private apartments. Nothing had run out. Nothing ever ran out. No disease killed them. No predator got in. No famine, no flood, no cold. They had everything they needed, and they died anyway. That is the part that should bother you, because the man who built this place did not build it to study mice. He said so himself in writing. He spoke largely of mice, but his thoughts were on man. This is Universe 25. Welcome to Bone and Crown. To understand what happened in that pen, we have to go back 21 years. To a quarter-acre of woodland in Towson, Maryland. In 1947, a young zoologist named John Calhoun asked his neighbor for permission to build something behind his house. The neighbor said yes. Calhoun later guessed the man had pictured a few hutches, maybe a small run. What Calhoun built was a fenced quarter-acre pen. He called it a rat city. He put in 5 pregnant Norway rats, unlimited food, unlimited water, and no predators. Then he sat down to watch. He had done the arithmetic beforehand. By his calculation, the space could physically support around 5,000 rats. It never came close. Over 2 years of observation, the population settled at about 150. It never went above 200. And nothing was stopping it. There was food. There was room. There was no disease and nothing hunting them. The rats simply stopped. That number is the reason this story exists. Calhoun spent the next 25 years trying to explain 150. It is worth knowing who he was, because he was not a fringe figure. John Calhoun was born in Tennessee in 1917. He was a birdman first. As a teenager, he was already banding birds and publishing notes on them. He trained as a zoologist. He was patient, careful, and obsessive about record keeping. And he had one quality that made all of this possible. He was willing to watch the same enclosure every day for years and write down what he saw. Most scientists do not have the temperament for that. Calhoun did. By 1954, he was at the National Institute of Mental Health in Maryland, running larger, more controlled versions of the same experiment. Rats indoors in enclosures he could watch closely between 1958 and 1962. The pattern repeated every time. The rats met, mated, and bred quickly. Then the growth flattened, and then the behavior came apart. What he saw was strange enough that he had to invent words for it. Some males formed gangs and attacked without provocation. The hypersexual and violent ones he called probers. Aggressive females he called Amazons. And he noticed rats crowding around a single water bottle while others sat unused. Animals choosing to be packed together for no reason he could measure. He nicknamed those ones social drinkers. And then he noticed something about his own design that changed how he understood all of it. The food hoppers. To eat, a rat had to go to a feeding station. Eating took time, and while it ate, other rats arrived. So every rat in the colony learned the same lesson thousands of times. Food happens where other animals are. They began to prefer eating in crowds, not tolerate it, prefer it. A rat would walk past an empty feeder to reach a busy one. Calhoun had not designed that on purpose, but it meant the crowding was partly self-inflicted and partly built into the world he had made for them. For the collapse itself, he coined a term that entered the language. He called it the behavioral sink. In February 1962, Calhoun published all of this in Scientific American under the title Population Density and Social Pathology. It became one of the most cited papers in the history of psychology, quoted over 100 times in its first year alone. And that is where the story stops being about rats. The paper landed at exactly the wrong moment, or the right one, depending how you look at it. Cities across America were growing fast. Crime was rising. And in 1968, a biologist named Paul Ehrlich published a book called The Population Bomb, predicting mass starvation from overpopulation within a decade. Calhoun's rats were pulled straight into that argument, and he did nothing to stop it. That same year, the writer Tom Wolfe published an essay about New York City. He titled it, "Oh Rotten Gotham, Sliding Down into the Behavioral Sink." A few years later, a children's novel called Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of NIMH took its name directly from the laboratory Calhoun worked in. Hollywood picked it up too. In 1973, the film Soylent Green showed an overcrowded future where people are packed onto staircases and fed on processed rations. The behavioral sink had become a set design. Urban planners cited Calhoun. Architects cited Calhoun. Politicians arguing about public housing cited Calhoun. Almost none of them had read the actual papers. Rats in a pen had become an argument about human beings. And Calhoun still did not have his answer about the number 150, so he built the biggest version yet. And here is a detail that gets skipped in almost every telling of this story. Universe 25 was not his first attempt at the mouse version. It was his 25th. 24 earlier enclosures had been started and stopped. Most of them ended for a very unglamorous reason. He ran out of laboratory space, or the funding cycle ended, or the building needed the room back. Universe 25 was simply the one he finally got to run all the way to the end. That matters, because it means what we call the mouse utopia experiment is not one bold idea. It is 25 years of a man refusing to let go of a question. The official name was the mortality inhibiting environment for mice. Everyone called it Mouse Heaven. It was a metal pen, roughly 9 feet on each side and about 4.5 feet high, divided into 4 sections. The walls held 256 nesting boxes, stacked in columns, each one reachable by its own mesh tunnel. Every mouse could have a private apartment. Food and water were unlimited and refilled before they ran low. The temperature was held steady. There was shredded paper for nests, as much as any mouse wanted. Calhoun screened every animal for disease before it went in, and no new animals were ever added. There were no cats, no hawks, no snakes. No winter. The enclosure could physically hold around 3,000 mice. Remember that number. It matters later, and not for the reason you would expect. On the 9th of July, 1968, Calhoun opened the door and put in 8 mice, 4 males and 4 females. All 48 days old, all healthy. Then he closed it and started counting. Calhoun divided what followed into 4 phases. He gave them names, and the names tell the story on their own. Phase A, he called strive. Phase B, exploit. Phase C, equilibrium. And Phase D, he simply called die. Phase A lasted 104 days, and almost nothing happened. 8 mice in a space built for thousands. They explored. They chose nesting boxes. They worked out who lived where. Calhoun called it the adjustment period. It was completely ordinary. The same behavior any healthy colony would show. Then the first litters were born, and the numbers started to move. For the next 1.5 years, The population doubled every 55 days. 8 became 16. 16 became 32. By month 19, there were 2,200 mice inside. On paper, it looks like a complete success. The colony was thriving. But Calhoun was watching something in his data that did not fit, and it was the same thing he had seen in Towson 20 years earlier. The mice were not spreading out. There were empty apartments, entire quiet sections of the pen, with nobody in them. And the mice would not use them. They crowded into the same areas, ate at the same feeders, slept in the same stacks. Hundreds of animals pressed together while good space sat unused a few feet away. This is the first thing about Universe 25 that people get wrong. The mice were not running out of room. They chose to be crowded. Try to picture the pen at its peak. 9 feet across, 4 sections, 2,200 animals. The noise would have been constant, squeaking, scratching, the metal tunnels rattling as mice moved through them. The smell would have been overwhelming. In one corner, a stack of nesting boxes so full that mice are climbing over each other to get in. In the opposite corner, an identical stack, clean, warm, and completely empty. That image is the whole experiment. Everything a mouse needs, sitting untouched, 4 feet away. Around day 315, the growth rate suddenly slowed. Not from hunger, not from lack of space. And here, Calhoun finally got his answer to the question he had been carrying since 1947. In a normal colony, young males grow up, fight for territory, win or lose, and either take a place in the group or leave to find another. That is how rodent society works. It requires somewhere to go. In Universe 25, there was nowhere to go. Every territory already had an owner, and those owners had no reason to die and nothing to fear. The older dominant males held their space and kept holding it. So an entire generation of young males grew up with no role available, no territory, no rank, no function inside the group. That was the answer. The Towson rats had stopped at 150, not because the pen was full, but because the social structure was full. A population does not stop when it runs out of food. It stops when it runs out of roles. The mice had food. They had shelter. They had no place. What happened next did not look like nature. It looked like a breakdown. Some dominant males became wildly aggressive and attacked without cause. Not over food, not over territory, not over females. They attacked animals that were doing nothing at all, including pups, including mice that had already stopped fighting back. The violence had no pattern, and that is what made it different from normal fighting. Normal rodent aggression is a negotiation. 2 animals fight, 1 gives up, and it ends. There are rules. This had no rules. Attacks came without warning, stopped without reason, and settled nothing. Wounds went untreated because there was no grooming between animals anymore. Calhoun recorded tail biting. He recorded cannibalism. The young males with no role split into 2 groups. One turned violent in a random and disorganized way. The other simply gave up. They stopped competing entirely. They gathered in large passive clumps in the middle of the pen, sometimes hundreds together, doing nothing, and let other mice attack them without responding. Then the mothers changed, and that is where the colony really ended. Female mice normally defend their nests with real determination. In Universe 25, they began abandoning their young. Some moved litters and left half behind. Some attacked their own pups. Some stopped building nests at all and drop their young on the open floor. In some sections, infant deaths went above 90%. Every mouse born in this period grew up without normal parenting, without a stable group, without ever learning what mouse society was supposed to look like. Hold that thought. It becomes the whole story. Quick pause before the part of this experiment you have probably heard about. If you are practicing English with Bone and Crown, and this is helping, hit subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it keeps this channel going. And tell me in the comments which word in this episode was hardest for you. I read them. All right, back inside the pen. This is the part of Universe 25 that people remember. It is also the part that gets exaggerated the most. Here is what Calhoun actually recorded. A group of male mice withdrew from the colony completely. They did not fight. They did not defend anything. They did not court females. And they did not mate. They found the highest, quietest nesting boxes. And they stayed there. What they did instead was eat, sleep, and groom. Constantly. They groomed so much that their coats were flawless. No scars, no bite marks, no missing fur, which, in a violent colony, is extremely unusual. Calhoun called them the beautiful ones. They were the healthiest looking animals in the enclosure. They were also, biologically, already finished. They never reproduced, not once. They lived comfortable, undisturbed lives in a paradise. And they contributed nothing to the next generation. Because for them, there was no next generation. And they were not a small minority. In the final period, this behavior spread through a large share of the surviving population. There is something genuinely unsettling about the photographs from this stage. You are looking at the winners, clean fur, no injuries, well-fed, calm. By every measure a vet would use, these were the healthiest mice in the building, and they were a dead end, every single one of them. Calhoun's point was not that they were lazy or weak. It was that they had never been given anything to be. There was no territory to hold, no rank to earn, no mate to win, no young to raise. Every job in that society was taken permanently. So they did the only thing left. They opted out, and they looked wonderful doing it. On roughly day 560, the population reached its peak, about 2,200 mice. The pen could hold around 3,000. It never got close. The colony stopped growing at 2/3 of its physical capacity in a place with unlimited food. 21 years after Towson, the same result at a different scale. After that, the numbers only went down. Births slowed, then became rare, then stopped. The last recorded conception happened around day 600. From that moment, Universe 25 had a fixed end date. Every mouse inside was already alive, and no more were coming. There was no plague and no war. The mice simply stopped producing a future, then aged out, one at a time, over the following 2 years. This was Phase D, the one Calhoun had named Die, before he knew what it would look like. And what it looked like was quiet. The violence faded, because the violent animals aged, and there was nobody young to replace them. The population thinned out. The pen got roomier every month. By the end, a mouse in Universe 25 had more space, more food, and more peace than any mouse in the experiment had ever had. And it did nothing with any of it. Calhoun tried to save them. The result is the most disturbing finding in the entire experiment. He took healthy survivors out of Universe 25 and moved them into new enclosures. Low population, plenty of space. This should have worked. Remove the crowding and the behavior should return to normal. That is what everyone expected. It did not work. They still did not court. They still did not mate. They still did not build nests or raise young. Put into an empty paradise, with every problem removed, they behaved exactly as they had in the crowded one. These animals had never learned to be mice. They were born into chaos, raised by mothers who did not parent, in a group with no working structure. The behavior was not being blocked by the environment. It was missing. Calhoun's conclusion was blunt. The damage was permanent. By the 22nd of June, 1972, there were 122 mice left. All of them were old. None of them were breeding. The 256 apartments stood mostly empty. The feeders were still full. Universe 25 ended with the last animal, in a space that still had everything it had on the first day. 4 years, one enclosure, and a species that removed itself while surrounded by abundance. Calhoun published his results in 1973, in a paper with a title that tells you exactly how he saw it. He called it Death Squared. He argued there were 2 deaths, not one. The first, he called the death of the spirit. That is when an animal stops doing what its species does, stops competing, stops courting, stops raising young, stops taking any part in the group. The animal is alive. It eats, sleeps, and grooms. But it has already left. The second death is the ordinary one, and by then, it is only paperwork. His point was that the first death came long before the second, and once it arrived, the outcome was already fixed. The beautiful ones were dead a year before they died. He was open about applying this to people. He wrote that he spoke largely of mice, but that his thoughts were on man. And here's the part almost nobody knows about him. Calhoun did not think the ending was inevitable. He thought it was a design problem. He spent the rest of his career trying to work out what a species needs beyond food and shelter, what he called conceptual space, roles, purpose, somewhere to go. He wrote about applying it to hospitals, to prisons, to city planning. He kept working on it until he retired from the National Institute of Mental Health in 1986. And he died in 1995. The warning is the part the world remembered. The search for a solution is the part it forgot. Universe 25 is real. It was published, and it is still cited today. What it proves is a completely different question, and here's the honest answer. The experiment documents what the mice did. It does not establish that the same mechanism governs human populations. That step was interpretation, and it was Calhoun's own, not a finding in the data. There are specific criticisms worth knowing. The pen prevented the single most normal response to crowding, which is leaving. No mouse could migrate. So the study measured a trapped population, not simply a dense one. Every animal was descended from 8 individuals, so the later generations were closely related, and human societies have reached very high densities without producing anything like this collapse. Calhoun encouraged the human comparison himself, which is part of why it spread so far. So if someone tells you this experiment proves what is happening to human society right now, they are going further than the evidence allows. That does not make it less interesting. It makes it more interesting. Because the real finding is stranger than the myth. Strip away the arguments about humans, and one result remains. And it is not really about crowding at all. Social behavior is not automatic. It has to be learned, and it has to be learned young from animals that already know it. The mice of Universe 25 lost the ability to be mice within a single generation. Not because they were sick, because nobody taught them and the window closed. Remove the teaching, and it does not come back. Not with space, not with food, not with safety, not with time. Calhoun tested that directly. The answer was no. That finding does not require any claim about cities or birth rates. It stands on its own, and it is why a study of mice from 1968 is still being argued about today. There is one more thing worth sitting with. Everything that killed Universe 25 was a solution to something. Unlimited food solved hunger. No predators solved fear. Perfect climate solved winter. Disease screening solved illness. Calhoun removed every problem a mouse could have, and the mice stopped functioning. That is not an argument for hunger, or predators, or winter. Nobody is saying suffering is good, but it does raise a question that the experiment cannot answer. And that is exactly why people keep coming back to it. What were those problems doing? What job were they quietly performing that nothing else took over when they were gone? Calhoun thought the answer was structure. Problems create roles. Roles create purpose. And purpose is what a social animal actually runs on. He could not prove it, but he watched a species disappear inside a paradise twice in two different animals, 21 years apart. Here's what I want you to answer in the comments. Does Universe 25 tell us something real about people? Or does it only tell us something about mice in a metal box with no way out? There are serious arguments on both sides. Calhoun himself chose the more debatable one. Tell me where you land and why. All right, the part you came for, 10 words. All of them appeared in today's story, most of them several times. I will give you the number, the word, what it means, and an example from the story you just heard. Number 1, utopia. A utopia is a perfect place where everything is ideal and nothing is missing. Example from the story. Calhoun built a utopia for mice with unlimited food and no predators. Number 2, thrive. To thrive means to grow strongly and do very well. Example from the story. For 19 months, the colony seemed to thrive, doubling in size every 55 days. Number 3, density. Density is how many individuals live in a certain amount of space. Example from the story. The mice chose high density, crowding together while empty apartments stayed empty. Number 4, aggressive. Aggressive means ready to attack, angry, or violent. Example from the story. Dominant males became aggressive and attacked mice that were doing nothing at all. Number 5, withdraw. To withdraw means to move away from others or stop taking part. Example from the story. The beautiful ones withdrew from the colony and never came back. Number 6, neglect. To neglect means to fail to care for someone who depends on you. Example from the story. Mothers began to neglect their young, and in some sections, almost no pups survived. Number 7, abundance. Abundance means having far more than enough of something. Example from the story. The mice died surrounded by abundance, with the feeders still full. Number 8, bond. A bond is a close connection between two living things. Example from the story. The young mice never formed normal social bonds, and they never learned to. Number 9, collapse. A collapse is a sudden and complete failure. Example from the story. The collapse of Universe 25 did not come from hunger. It came from behavior. Number 10, legacy. A legacy is what a person or an event leaves behind long after it ends. Example from the story. The legacy of Universe 25 is a question scientists are still arguing about today. Utopia, thrive, density, aggressive, withdraw, neglect, abundance, bond, collapse, legacy, 10 words. And you did not memorize a list. You watched a utopia thrive and then fail. You watched density rise while space sat empty. You watched aggressive males attack and quiet ones withdraw. You watched mothers neglect their young in the middle of abundance until no bonds were left, and the whole thing collapsed. That is the legacy. And that is how the words stay with you. It started with 5 pregnant rats in a barn, and a number nobody could explain. It ended 25 years later with 122 old mice in a pen that still had food, water, heat, and 256 empty apartments. Calhoun spent the rest of his career trying to design an environment where this would not happen. He never found one. Thanks for watching Bone and Crown. If this one stayed with you, send it to someone who likes the uncomfortable kind of history. And come back next week.